So do you want to wait till official time, or does it? Yeah. Okay, we'll wait. So maybe we have to tell like some jokes or something. You guys must. Okay, this is completely random today. I subscribe to this thing called Good Clean Funnies, or gives you basically Good Clean Funnies. This morning's, I swear, first time ever happened for, I don't know, 7 years. It was an Alaskan joke. But now I'm struggling to come up with, so maybe you guys can fill this in, because I bet you'll remember it. So a bush pilot has a passenger, and he's flying into an airport, and the airplane goes down real low, and then comes back up again, and he does this 2 or 3 times, and then finally the passenger says, "Excuse me, can I ask what you're doing?" And the pilot says, "Yeah, I'm checking to see if that runway's been plowed." And do you know this? And so the passenger said, "This is the part I'm going to mess up." But the passenger says, "Well, what's your verdict?" And he says, "No, it hasn't been plowed." And the passenger says, "How do you know?" He says, "Well, I'm the one who plows it." That's the best I could do. So, does it sound difficult?
You know what might be useful in the 1 minute that we have left? Let's just go around and tell Larry who you are for those that haven't met him yet. That might give you
That'd be super.
Sort of an idea of who you are.
That'd be super.
My name is Kristen Bouchard. I'm an instructional designer here at UNC.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Marissa, communication.
Marissa. Chris, Sue, yeah, we've done Chris, Sue, Chris. If we just say Chris, does that like get everybody? Anyone in the room not named Chris? No. Okay, then I know Carol, of course. Casey?
And I'm Madeira. I'm the faculty development coordinator here at UNC.
Wonderful. Hi, how are you? Wonderful. Hi, Deborah. Wow. I'd love to hear more about that. Good.
And I have a PhD student now who is doing research and learning on this.
Really?
Yes.
That would be very cool to learn. Good.
So I'm really interested in what you have to say.
Now you're setting me up like, oh no.
I'm here for a reason.
Good, thank you. How about in the back? Wonderful. Nice to meet you, Chris.
I'm Brooke Sheridan. I'm an instructional designer.
Hi, Brooke.
And I'm Tina Johnson. I'm also an instructional designer.
And Tim Stickle with Eli Student Services.
Terrific.
Dallas Bud, instructional designer.
Kelly Garner, factory services coordinator.
Okay. And I met Susan.
James Cross.
Owen Guthrie, instructional designer. This is Chris Malmberg also.
Chris, he's got his head down deep in technology, so very cool.
Okay, so let me just give a brief introduction to Larry, and I should have come prepared with all your credentials.
You can make something up.
Okay, I'll make it. So he was skydiving earlier this morning. We're very, very pleased to have Larry Ragan here with us. I met Larry a couple of years ago at a professional development that I was attending, and he's been really helpful and kind and always informative, and I've been really appreciative of that. So he was up here, actually he was coming to Anchorage for the AGTL conference, which begins on Saturday.
Tomorrow, yes. Yep.
And he offered to make a flight trip and come and visit with us for the day, and obviously I was thrilled, and so we're very pleased to have him here with us today. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what he's doing with Coil at Penn State.
And other topics. We decided at breakfast that we'll be as wide and as varied as possible. So don't. It doesn't have to lock in on one topic. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you. Years and years ago, we had a faculty member. Actually, she was the vice president for continuing education who came from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and then came to Penn State. And since that time, for some reason, I always had this inclination is I want to get there at some point. So my 24-year-old is in Anchorage. He's at the university in AmeriCorps, and he's finishing up a full year. He came up last June, and he's finishing up his year. So we also took this as an opportunity to come up and visit with my son Kyle. He's going back to the East Coast. He just got a job in D.C. And when he found out about this job, which was only a couple days ago, he was sort of bummed out. And first weeks ago when we were talking about the job, I kept on saying, "Oh, Kyle, this would be great. Oh, Dad," he said, "this would be marvelous. It's with the GSA, and it's a leadership development program and things." And then as it got closer and closer to him actually getting the job, and it sounds like he had to pass through these filters, then yesterday he got a text. He said, "I got the job." I said, "Well, Kyle, that's great." He says, "Well, I got the job. It means I have to leave Alaska." He said he's just had an incredible experience, so it's been a great thing. I did learn one thing about him, though, when I came up with my wife. We got into his vehicle, which was not a pleasant experience, it turns out. He drives a 2000 Camry, which he drove across the country to get here. And my wife was just in the back seat, and we were just kind of overwhelmed by the car. And she kept on saying, "Kyle, can we, for your birthday, I'd love to take it to a car wash. There's a car wash right down the street, and they have vacuums in there and everything." And I finally figured out, she asked him probably 4 or 5 times, and he kept on refusing. I finally figured out this is his badge of honor, right? It's like how dirty your car can get. Plus, he said, if we wash the car, the police will actually see that I still have Pennsylvania plates on. Right now, you can't tell that. So, well, it's really it's a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to share a little bit of our work with you. I had the pleasure of having lunch or breakfast with a couple of your colleagues and talking about the similarities between Penn State's World Campus, which is our online program, and what's going on here in Fairbanks. And there are a lot of similarities of experiences, the goods and some of the lows as well. And I really want to be open with you today and tell you we haven't figured everything out. I guarantee you. We're just on a different scale. We may be a little bit ahead of you in some sort of, because we started in '98, pretty serious about this. And obviously we're larger, no doubt about that. But a lot of the issues and the challenges and the struggles you're figuring out now, we've either gone through or we may be at the exact same spot. I wanted to share a little bit of a project that we've been working on for about 2 years now called COIL, which is the Center for Online Innovation and Learning, and describe this initiative to you in hopes that maybe plant some seeds about some ideas for 2 things. One of the things that may help you in your work as your online program grows and becomes more integrated into the mainstream, but also that you may be interested at some point in collaboration, because we're real big about reaching out and finding people who have joint ideas. When you mentioned the PhD student, my ears went up, because we're looking for those kind of projects all the time, those kind of reciprocal kind of relationships. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're trying to build a culture of research and development and innovation and leadership in online innovations. Now, I'm really careful about not saying online learning. One of the things we did when the center was set up was to make sure that we're talking about learning in all formats, that it's not restricted to simply online. So we're looking at online innovations or the use of technologies in the teaching and learning process across all different formats. So I have a very unique situation, actually. I'm a co-director. There are 3 other co-directors of one center. The center itself has 3 full-time staff, but 4 co-directors. So it's a little top-heavy, but we did that for a particular reason. And the reason was to make sure that the center had buy-in and integration from other units within the university. Trying to write a mission statement, however, with 4 co-directors, each of which think and feel differently about the center, has been challenging. But this is kind of what we've come up with. We're really keen on trying to influence and change, improve, if you will, the teaching and learning process regardless of where it occurs, in all different formats, by or through the use of online innovations. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the structure, some of the things we've set up to try to make that happen. So after I did this, of course, I thought about it'd be really nice if it worked out to be PENN somehow instead of Rice, because now it sounds like a university in Texas. But I found this image and thought, well, it kind of represents what we do. coil is a catalyst down here, and through these four focus, our interest is improving what happens in teaching learning. And these are the four focus of what we try to do. The first is that we're trying to actually engage in primary research. And I'll talk to you about how we do that. It's kind of an interesting project. The second is that we want to take what we learn from this research and embed it back into the institution to make things better. And that's the whole point, right? Is that we improve that teaching and learning environment that we're each in, students and faculty alike. The third has been a real challenge for us, and that's the idea of building community. We were sharing at breakfast, oftentimes we have great success of getting faculty together for co-learning, co-experiences, but when the event is over, everyone sort of goes away and they go back to their academic units, and it's very hard to try to bring that community back together again. And the third is that we're trying to get engagement. We're really trying to create a model of citizen participation, citizen research, if you will. It's kind of like we did the Denali tour yesterday. And the bus driver was telling us every time they see animals, they log them, exact location and everything. It's that citizen research thing, and that goes in and feeds data. We're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to get our faculty and our staff and our students as engaged in these activities as possible. And that was a little bit different for us in terms of Penn State. When we talk about research at Penn State, we tend to think primarily about research for faculty, which is terrific. And as we all know, funding resources from other agencies have become more difficult to get. And so when we created the center and we thought about how do we stimulate research environments, we really wanted to go out and say to the staff as well, which is where we know a lot of innovation is occurring. A lot of new design and development is occurring at the staff level. They've got their hands on it. They're often very up to date on the research. It's a great resource pool. How do we tap into that as a community so that begins informing? So we've really encouraged through our research initiatives, I'll tell you about in a moment, we've really encouraged faculty and staff to reach out to each other and find ways to do interdisciplinary projects across colleges, but also to have a team made up of a variety of different people. The one group of that threesome that we haven't yet tapped into as well is the student, especially the undergraduate student. Graduate students, we have them represented on our research projects. Getting an 18 to 22-year-old, trying to figure out how to get to them and how to get to them in a meaningful way to participate on projects has just been a little bit challenging. I have some ideas, but we're not quite there yet. So the very first topic is on the research. We use this process called the Research Initiation Grants, or RIGs. As a matter of fact, just about a week ago, we finished our round of call for RIGs for this spring. What we do is we go out probably about in March and start to communicate with our faculty and our staff and student groups about opportunity to apply for these RIGs. These are really to serve as initiation grants, which means that once that project sort of gets up and running, after a year, perhaps two, they're able to go to NSF or NIH or something and get a larger grant. It's seed money. We do have a luxury, so I'll just describe it. There's no other way to describe it. But we have about $500,000 per year coming from the revenue generated by the World Campus. And I should probably step back a little bit. I'll describe that in 1 second. But we have about $250,000 per grant cycle. We do it twice a year to seed out into our community to start these. So we put a maximum limit on here of $50K, and a lot of that is going to faculty members paying for graduate student research. We encourage faculty not to apply for buyout time as much as they can, not to do that. Some do. However, in the summer we make exceptions and we do fund over the summertime. I talked about that engagement by the community. All of these RIGs are decided by the community, not by the directors. And that's the cycle we just went through. As a matter of fact, I'll just throw it out there, but we were always looking for reviewers of our rigs. If anyone's interested in serving that, it's all done online. You're more than welcome to join us for the next cycle as well, and you get an idea to see what kind of projects people are talking about. The impact portion of our project is really about how do we bring what we know and what we're finding back into the community. This is really proven more difficult than I would have thought in the beginning, you know. So we're only 2 years old, and so we haven't quite gone through a full cycle of grants yet that have had outcomes that we can take and embed back into. But we're starting to get there. We're beginning to have people, as you all know, doing actual research takes a long time. It's not something you do in 6 months. It takes a year or 2 years or 3 years. So what we have, our cycle is for funding for an 18-month period. Hopefully that's enough time to get your research project spun up enough, get a little bit of data back in, and then you can reapply back for coil rig grants if you need to continue your project. Or at that point, perhaps you have enough evidence or enough proof of concept to go and get a larger grant. We're really focused on this idea of taking research and applying it, getting it into practice as much as possible. Research is a funny term, you know. Research can mean sort of empirical research where you set up control groups and studies and all that and do statistical analysis. It can also be very practical, you know. So we had 2 projects last spring who put in to get Google Glass. So we had, I forget, I think we purchased 2 Google Glass for that project. They had defined exactly what they wanted to do, online labs using Google Glasses, and so we funded, that's the type of a project that we're able to fund. And then we tend to run a variety of different kinds of workshops. As a matter of fact, one that we just started, Chris, and I forget our faculty development person, it's kind of fun. We just did this. We've done it twice now. It's called a BYOP. You bring your own problem. And the idea behind a BYOP is that we'll have some technology or we'll have some concept, and we want faculty members or staff to bring, we want them to leave with a solution to something that's meaningful to them. So our first one was on badging. So we spent about 4 hours together. We asked people to bring their own context of badging, and then we worked with them, and they divided up into teams. It was really pretty cool. When they left, they had at least a concept of how they were going to apply badging to a course they did. So I used IELOL. IELOL is the Leadership Institute that we do at Penn State. I put badging into IELOL last year. I didn't think I did a great job. I sort of slapped it on at the very end. This workshop, I participated in the workshop. We had faculty members who know how to do badging, and they helped me work through a better structure. So it's those kinds of things. We did one 2 weeks ago with a company in a product called CoLearner. That's a curation and aggregation tool. And we actually had the CEO come over and do it with us. He's from the UK. And so people brought their own curation issues, and we spent time in the BYOP working on their particular problem. It was kind of a neat experience. So this is our attempt at building community, which I said at Penn State. Just by way of context, at University Park we have about 45,000 students, and we, in total Penn State system, this is all 24 campuses, we have about 5,000 faculty members. Primarily, I would say those are full-time, not necessarily tenure line. They may be instructors, they may be lecturers, they may be tenured, non-tenured faculty. And increasingly, in particular, online programs, we're moving to an adjunct format, because we are now sort of tapping out the pool of available faculty in departments. So we're working with the departments to find ways to be creative about finding new faculty to teach in the programs, because our programs, our trajectory is pretty significant in the online programs. I mentioned to you a little, let me just walk down through these very quickly here. We do a spring symposium in March called the TLT, where they typically bring in a high-end speaker. Last year it was Daniel Pink. If any of you have read the Daniel Pink Blink, and he's written a couple of those kind of books. So we co-sponsor that. We've gotten pretty creative about reaching out with other units on campus. So we have another group on campus called the Schreier Institute for Teaching Excellence, and we partner with them when they're doing a faculty development program. We'll partner, we'll bring some money to the table, maybe do a lunch or something. But it's a way of us sort of building connections and relationships. Then this is the one I'm really kind of excited about, and I want to get moving on this fall, is tapping into our student network and getting students engaged in these research projects. I think is going to be a really, so I'm looking around the room to see there's, I won't ask you to put your hands up on your age, but I'm going to suspect there aren't too many people in here under 30. Maybe a couple. The way, when we talk to our graduate students, and when we talk to our undergraduate students, I get this real difference in how they perceive the world and how they see things and how they're willing to take risks and so forth. And I had one undergraduate student, he actually applied 2 times. He applied for a RIG grant and didn't get it. And I explained to him why the reviewers didn't fund his project. But when we were talking, he said, you know, you guys are a bunch of old fogies up there thinking you're doing like first-hand research. I mean, he was very nice. As a matter of fact, yeah, he's been very nice. I really appreciated the feedback. He said, but you have no idea how we as 18, he was about 22 or 23, how we see the world and how we think. And I thought, man, we've got to find a way to tap into that pool and get some of those ideas and that energy into our research stuff, or else we turn into a whole bunch of fogies talking to each other. So, do you have co-space and maker spaces up here? Are you familiar with that terms? Do you have some of that?
There's some specific spaces in Anchorage.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have a real dedicated space. There's some little enclaves in Fairbanks, but nothing real central.
And I've never been to ours. We have 2 of them. I think MakeSpace is a resident facility. I think that's the idea. If you're around innovation, you move into a house like a fraternity for innovators. Co-space is the one we're probably better. Wouldn't that be cool? And I think there are people, they're not necessarily students, they're people from the community who go into this, and they have, but you're surrounded around with people all the time who are thinking entrepreneurially, they're thinking about innovations. That would be interesting. The co-space one is where you go, you have meetings, or you just have programs where you come in and you can bring a problem and they can hack away at it, or you can have discussions about starting up businesses. It's an incubator. It's an incubator, or maybe a petri dish would be a better description. But I'm really interested to see if COIL can tap into that group somehow and make some things happen. And then lastly, we have this IELOL. This is the institute that Carol participated in a couple of years. We're going into our 6th year. So we've got about 170 alums. And again, this is something I'm really fortunate about. But I'm able to use this program because it's a blended teaching program. It starts in July and ends in November. I can use this as my way to test new theories and try new things. It's a leadership development program. It's been a lot of fun. Met some incredible people, and it's been a great way to test out new ideas because I really like to try new things in education. I'm all about testing and trying things, and failure as well. We do that too. So the engagement aspect is how do we get our community to buy into what we're doing in this research project, these research initiatives. Again, my colleague said to me the other day, like I said, we only have 3 full-time folks. So we have me, I'm full-time, we have a program manager, and we have a staff assistant, and that's the full-time staff. But so we often around a cup of coffee in the morning, we'll kick ideas around, and he says, you know, it's just an echo chamber in here. We're going out and the people applying for our new rigs are the same ones who already received old rigs. Like we're not breaking out yet and getting into communities where we're not known. We have to do a better job of that. A couple programs we run though to try to get the community engaged is these are webinars, the COIL conversations. They've actually been very effective. They're 1-hour webinars. They're from a faculty member, from a student, or they're from a graduate student, or a practitioner in the community says, I have a question, or I have an idea, or I tried a new piece of software. We said, terrific, come in, do on a webinar, do a 30-minute little discussion about what you've done, and then we're going to open it up for some discussion. So we happen to use Connect Pro, Adobe Connect Pro. You guys use Google+, and we have dialogue. And sometimes we get 12 people, sometimes we get 50 people, depending on the topic. Very, very organic. You know, someone will say, I'm interested in how do I put badging on my course? I want to do a course. We'll say, bring your problem to this group, and then everybody else contributes to it. So it's a lot of fun. We also do a Fisher Lecture Series. This is a person in our community, an alumni who's given us some money, so we can bring in some bigger name speakers who have bigger price tags, and they come in and will do talks for us. So the guy from the president of edX, Anant Agarwal, is coming in June. People like that, and the idea is to bring them to the community face-to-face, have some dialogue, have some discussion. We set it up where they typically will have a 2-day visit, so they're meeting with faculty groups and students group. It's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of overhead in managing, and some of the people coming in, frankly, are kind of like prima donnas, you know, and they've got to have like M&Ms in their room. But most people are really, really great. You bring them in, it's a different context for them, it's a different environment, it's a lot of fun. Then I mentioned the BYOP. So these are all strategies that we've been trying to do to create a sense of community and a sense of belonging within Penn State. I mentioned a little bit already our full-time staff. This was pretty strategic to have 4 co-directors. I was just talking to my wife about this. I said, I think we're about at the end of the functionalness of the 4 directors. It's starting to become cumbersome when you have decisions that need to be made and you have to consult with 3 other people on every decision. I think next year we'll move to the point where we'll have one director, which will be me, and then say a board of advisors or something like that. Because right now we only have representation from the College of Education, Information's IST, which I got it wrong. It's not IST. Information Science and Technology, and Teaching and Learning with Technology, which is a supportive group on campus. And but it means we're missing out on a whole bunch of other colleges and other programs. So we've got to figure out how to broaden that. So we're still kind of norming. So I had this great idea the other day. I said to my co-directors, we've been talking about as a group, as COIL as a group, how do we focus in on some themes? So right now in our COIL rigs, we have projects all over the place. We have one guy working on 3D printers, how to use 3D printers in the classroom. We have another group that's doing looking at competencies for online teaching success. We have another one doing badges, but they're kind of scattered. And we've said, you know, we'd probably use our resource investment a little better if we narrowed it down some and focused. Matter of fact, I got to tell you about this one rig because I just saw this come through, just as a sidebar. But we've already funded him one project. Do you know what a heptatic glove is? You probably know it's the ones that have touch and feel to it, and you can do things with it, and then it changes on screen. So they submitted a pre-proposal. I reviewed the pre-proposal, and it looked really good, except I wrote back to them, and I said, first of all, I said, I think if you submit this proposal, hands down, it'll get awarded. No problem. But you might want to check your spelling. I said, I think you've left the G off of one word. So they had wrote down a hepatic love technique, and I thought, yeah, you want to check that one. So anyways, I came up with these 3 thematic areas by, I shouldn't say me, our group came up, by going out and talking with different constituent groups. What are you feeling? Where's the pressure? And we came up with a collection, and they made, very nicely, they made PAQ, personalization, access, and quality at scale. And I presented it to my guys, and they said, oh, it's not PAC, that's too boring. It's got to be QUAP. So for right now, we're using COIL QUAP, which doesn't sound very professional, but it does help us focus in a little bit on our rig process. So I think in the future what we'll do, like for the next fall, we'll probably say, identify how your proposal would queue up with one of these 3 domains. Quality at scale, Access, in this case, by access we mean, which is very similar with your issues here, is how do we provide more people with a connection to and access to course of study, not accessibility issues in serving students who have disability issues. And then the third one is personalization. And we floated around on this one a little bit. We have big issues right now with retention and student completion. Our rates are not what we want them to be. And if you're following anything by federal guidelines, there's a lot of uproar about this. Not just for online, by the way. They're looking at all of education saying, where are your students going, and for this investment of money that we're putting into them, are they getting meaningful jobs and so forth. We think personalization is a method of improving student retention and success. And by personalization, we can then pull in topics like big data, which is what we're starting to look at right now. How can we customize the learning experience? How can we create an adaptive system to the learner, depending on how they're doing? So all of that will fit sort of under this rubric. So these are the three. The first is, can we do high-quality instruction to a large number of students? I was going to try to go through the whole experience today without using the word of massive online open courses, but I'll throw it out there. We've done MOOCs. We are continuing to do MOOCs. We're working mostly with Coursera, but that may change. What have we learned from that? Well, we've learned that you really can do large-scale instruction at quality at scale. And I think in the beginning, I, for one, was kind of saying, you really can't do that. It has to be, 20-to-1 kind of a ratio. And what we've learned is being creative about things, you can create larger scale relationships. There's some trade-offs, of course, but it can be done. I've already mentioned the access one is making Penn State courses available to students. And I have to put in here qualified students. We are not an open university. You have to go through qualifications to get in. In the personalization I mentioned very briefly. So we also have some challenges, and I just want to sort of throw these out there. This is sort of in the area of full disclosure. I've already mentioned to you some of these. Our selection process right now for the research grants is not terrific. We have reviewers. They sign up to serve on a review cycle with us, and typically we get 20-30 reviewers, which is good. Now, if any of you have ever submitted for research grants, you often learn how to write a good research proposal by serving on the review team, and we know that that's happening a lot. That's wonderful, no problem with that. I mentioned already this challenge we have of going from research to application. How do we bring what we're learning back into both resident instruction, blended learning, and online? What are the mechanisms? How are we able to show, if somebody said in 3 years, let's say, or 5 years, Larry, what's the output? Where are we seeing the benefit of this investment into COIL? What do I point to? What's the evidence I have? Oh, we improved this or that. We've got to be able to do that. We've got to be able to quantify that investment. Specifically, since the World Campus is funding COIL, we have to figure out what are the pain points of the World Campus. Number one pain point we know of today is that student completion. Those rates, those numbers are still too low, and we're struggling. So what can COIL be doing to help, improve that process? But I also mentioned resident instruction as well. What issues are they having in resident instruction? This is an overused joke, but it's true. When you walk into a Penn State class in your freshman year, say Econ 2, and there are 400 other students sitting in the hall, you're virtually in distance education, right? I mean, you don't have a lot of connection to that faculty member, and you could be watching it streamed for all that matter. It's not a real personal experience. So how can we improve the RE experience, the resident experience, by online innovations as well? I mentioned already is the community, the struggle, challenge to get into our community groups. We We try to say to our faculty groups, hey, look, we'll come in and share with your faculty what projects are being funded. We're very open to dialogue. We'll review your proposals before you submitting. Not a problem. And then this is the idea of trying to get to larger, different constituent groups. By the way, I just want to throw this out. One of the things that will bump up your COIL proposal is if you show collaboration with other units within the institution. So if you're in engineering, have you reached out to somebody and you're interested in, I don't know, designing an online lab for a mechanical part or something? Have you reached out to anybody over in IST because maybe they're doing something with robots? Or how about in College of Education where they're already studying this? So we really, and oftentimes these disciplines are really siloed. They've never talked to anybody in education. They've never talked to anybody in IST. So the 4 directors, this is one of the advantages, we can say, hey, we know Susan over in College of Ed. She's interested in the same topic. And we've made a lot of connections. That collaboration has been really helpful. Then we also suggest that they think about bringing on universities outside of Penn State system. So we had a proposal last spring for a College of Arts and Architecture music instructor, and she wanted to design a MOOC within the Big Ten. So she wrote a grant, and she's got funded to have 10 other schools in the Big Ten Conference with Penn State on this project. So they're collaborating, building a basic music education type course. Each institution is doing one portion of that course. That's pretty great. I'm working on a project on this competencies for teaching success, and we're collaborating with the University in Barcelona. It's a colleague of mine. So those kinds of things, it's Kyle Peck, who's one of our co-directors, loves this quote in a book he shares often, and it is that most of the smart people in the world probably don't work with you. They're out there someplace else, and you have to figure out how do you reach out into the larger community. I know you know this, but Penn State, we're very much like, oh, well, we're Penn State, we are, and Penn State and all that stuff, and we've got all this great talent and resource pool. It's very inward thinking, and it's sometimes, very hard to see the spot you're standing on. When you get out there, you see that there are other organizations and institutions doing things, and that collaboration is always, always fruitful. So this is kind of a mess right now. I'd say we're going through, I forget who did the stages of group forming, norming, storming. I forget who the researcher was, but you've heard of that. We're still in the norming phase. We're trying to figure out all of these different things, and how do we begin as a unit, as COIL, as a research organization, how do we start to norm? One of the things we've noticed is that as we go through our processes, like the COIL rig reviews, we're reinventing processes each time we do that. Very labor intensive, very inefficient. We have to start getting to the point where we have a little discipline about going through this. But we're only 2 years old, I always say. One of our directors, my friend Kyle, will keep on saying, I don't want to be normal. I don't want to be normalized. I want us to be an innovation, edgy, cutting group. You can only do that if you have some infrastructure so it's not draining all of your resources every time. So let me stop there on that project and address any questions or thoughts or ideas that come up. I'm hoping you got a few. I planted a few maybe about ways things have worked or haven't worked, and ideas you might have. Well, thank you. That was very interesting. Guys.
Something I think about quite a bit broadly is higher education is changing much faster than it's ever changed in the past. Universities classically change very slowly. And there's 2 issues, for me anyway. How can we anticipate what the direction is? And how can we get ahead of that direction so that we're not left in the dust and irrelevant in the future?
Well, I think when you answer the first one, if you'd send me an email, I'd really appreciate it. You know, the first question is, how do we know where it's going? I think there are some large themes that we should be paying attention to. One of the things that I think is positive, but most people don't like it, especially academics, is a realization that we're in a business. Ultimately, education is a business. Whether we like to, well, I hear faculty say, well, that's not why I came into higher education. Yes, I understand, but ultimately there's dollars attached and you have to survive. So I think one of the things we've done pretty well, I'd like to say, at least in the World Campus and at the higher university level, is understanding and thinking and talking very practically about the dollars and revenue models and all that kind of stuff. Gary Miller is a good friend of mine and really got our World Campus project off the ground in 1998. Said, you know, you can't be great unless you're good. You've really got to focus on the business model. So I think one thing is figuring out what's the business model that's going to work for you. And maybe that's the very first thing. I hate to say that. You start with that, but ultimately, if you're not generating the money, if it's not coming out of research, is it coming out of tuition dollars? Is it coming out of grants? Where is it coming from? And having that business plan for us. So I'll answer maybe by telling you a quick story. We are at about 16,000 students, headcount students, taking courses through the World Campus right now. Last spring, the university put out a new directive that said we should be at 45,000 by 2020. That was the mandate that was kind of put out there. So you're going to go like, okay, we're going to triple in a really short, under 10 years. How are we going to do that? The first thing the administrative group did was to sit back and say, well, let's do the finances. How do we get there? After they did some research and pulling in market research, they said we can't get there. We're not going to be able to get to that number. So we have to realize that now we can shoot higher than 16,000, but there's no practical way we're going to grow to 45,000 in 10 years. Okay, so the first number was put out as a way to challenge us. But one of the things it's forced us to do, Susan, is to sit back and think, okay, how do we make this academic enterprise economically sound and so forth. And that's taken a lot of work to figure out who we are, what's our mission, how do we serve students in Pennsylvania, what's that mean in relationship to students around the world, how many net new learners do we want. The single point of economic growth in the university right now, in our university, single growth, is Penn State's World Campus. Everybody is looking at the online program that we're doing as the way to help fund. Research dollars have gone down. Student tuition, I shared at breakfast, we are the highest, although I think that's changed. We are the highest public tuition cost in the United States, Penn State University. You can't sustain, you can't sustain that, and you can't keep on tacking on 5% and 7% increases in tuition every semester as your costs go up. You got to figure out how to change that. So I think it's this. For us, it's been a real sort of soul searching about who we are. Where does online learning fit in to resident instruction? What's the research component? And then how do you stay ahead of the curve? You talked about these forces of changes, these pressures. I mean, we feel them on a daily basis. In the online world, of course, we feel pressure for the for-profits, the Kaplans and the Phoenixes and those. So we have to sit back and say, well, what are we offering that is different from that? What's the added value for our learners? Why would they want to pay the money to come to a Penn State and get a Penn State degree? We didn't talk about this, Chris, but I thought about you this morning around the whole concept of badging. You know, how does badging fit into our, call it the ecosystem, the higher ed ecosystem? Does it fit? Does it not fit? Should we be thinking about more flexible learning degrees? You know, students picking paths that are maybe non-traditional, I mean really non-traditional, like, you know, 2 MOOC courses now that they get some degree of credit for, or they apply for a prior learning assessment. All of this stuff is creating a lot of churn within our university, people sitting down thinking about it and talking about it. It's not, I can guarantee you, it is not an approach of putting our heads into the sand and pretending it's going to go away. It's trying to figure out how do we take that next step that works for us. And it may be different for different institutions, but how does it work for us in order for our institution to succeed? And it's scary. I mean, there are a lot of days we sit around the table and it gets really, really tense. Traditional academics sometimes don't want to talk about the business side of it. They want to run programs that aren't going to create enough enrollments and revenue, and you know, you have some really, really hard conversations at times within the academy. I don't know if that helped that or not at all. Maybe it didn't help, but
I think all perspectives are helpful. I agree that we're being pushed into an ever-increasing business focus, which isn't the skill set that many of us were brought up with.
right.
So I just want to follow up a little bit on the economics of things, because there's a conflict here between something you said earlier in terms of retention and getting students through a program. I'm a traditional academic. We have, unfortunately, a wide range of students. We are an open university, so, you know, even though my degree is not so open, but the university is open. And so we invariably have and we have a large military contingent, so we have a broad range, a large age range of students. And I teach a freshman class. So all the broadness of all possible contingents are in my class. So the question then becomes, if I'm a true business model, I don't care if these students actually pass or not, because if they don't pass, then they come back next year and they're, again, another revenue stream. So there's my conflict, okay, in terms of pushing them through. And we do have students who have failed my class 5 times, and I've go get a job, you know. Then the other piece of that conflict is the older students know why they want to be in school, and the younger students frequently do not know why they want to be in school. And so they haven't taken the business model that says, you know, let's pass the class because I'm paying for it, or maybe they're not paying for it, right? So maybe somebody else is paying for it. And so they don't care that they have to pay this tuition year after year after year. But in teaching, either through, you know, and I'm just talking about teaching,
Sure.
you know, this generation of kids who think that they view the world in a different way. Yeah, I could talk about that, but, you know, how do you not only do the business model for the university, but educate the students on their business model of passing the class so that you can do the retention, and how do you deal with this conflict? You know, it's actually, I think, a larger mess than just saying business model, cost.
Joe, you said something when you first started talking that was really interesting, and that is saying to students, why don't you get a job? You know, shouldn't it be part of our responsibility to identify students, do a better job maybe of saying, you know, Penn State's not for you. We're not the right institution. We're not going to serve your needs. You're not going to, you know, bloom here. Here's some other options. And I don't know that we do. Well, I'd like to say we do a great job of it, but I don't know that we always do. I have the same issue. Like, I always think, okay, if I'm on the table and they're going to do open heart surgery on me, I don't want the surgeon in there who was sort of pushed through and encouraged to complete the surgery class when he really wasn't a very good mechanic. I mean, he's not a very good he shouldn't, you know. So it's all of these things. Do we need courses that weed students out? I think we do. So you're right. It is a complex intertanglement of these issues, of the business model and serving students right, helping them succeed when it's the right thing for them. My daughter, who's now 21, took one year at Penn State, did like moderately well. And at the end of that year, right before her second year was to start, it told us that she happened to live at home at the time, told us at dinner table she was moving to Nashville. This isn't for me, or it's not the right time. My wife and I had to sit back. I mean, this is a 21. She wasn't even 20 at the time. Leaving State College, Pennsylvania, moving to a time. Do you have a job? No, Dad. Do you have a way of getting there. Nope, I'm just going to get on an airplane. You know, really naive in a lot of the things. But she eventually did it, and it was a good experience for her. She tried some online courses, and she did not do well in either of her online courses. She said, you know, that the faculty member is making me do all the work. You know, she's not ready. Well, it's true, though, and I said, it's actually, I use her as a perfect example of she wasn't ready for the self-directiveness and self-management she has to have. I think one of the things that we could be doing a better job of, in particular in the online environment, but maybe in both, is helping students be better learners. Where do we invest the time and energy to help them? And I got to tell you, I don't think we're there yet. It's complex to learn online. It's complex to sit in a classroom and learn. No one ever did it for me, and it wasn't until my junior year that I figured out how to succeed in classes. I didn't say I figured out how to learn. I just figured out how to succeed in classes. I think we can be doing a better job of that. So for a faculty member, you know, I think you have a tough challenge of figuring out when do you kick them in the rear end or when do you kick them out, you know, in a manner of speaking, and then that has economic ramifications. And yeah, I wish I had an answer for you, but it's complex.
I'm interested in terms under the category of engagement, I guess. I'm interested in what you're doing with underrepresented or minority populations, because that's something that I'm kind of all about, and I would love to collaborate on that kind of thing, because I think the online environment, because of by its very nature, does not necessarily have some of the exclusion pieces that are so inherent in an institution. And not that an institution wants to have those exclusion sections, but they do. And so I'm interested in what you're doing in that area.
Yeah. You know, my answer is going to be probably it depends. And a lot of that is going to be germane to the academic unit of how much they're doing it at sort of when they're building the courses. What we do in the World Campus is we try to help the learning designers working on these projects and the faculty members think about cultural diversity and think about reaching as broad of an audience as possible. Again, I'm going to tell you, I don't think we're there. I think we're talking to 32-year-old females, mostly white. That's who we're hitting right now in our population. We're not seeking other populations for sometimes for good reasons. But in our courses are not yet, I don't think, embracing a multicultural perspective. And our faculty probably aren't real used to doing it. They're used to addressing whoever's in front of them, which is a typical 18 to 22-year-old, mostly white students. You come up to Penn State, folks, you're not going to see a lot of well, I shouldn't say that. There are other nationalities represented in larger numbers, but African American, you won't see as many. It's a problem we have. We're very rural. We think we're rural in Pennsylvania. We like to say we're equally inaccessible. I understand. My definition of rural has now changed. As we said about Juneau, yeah, you can only fly in. Now that's, I don't know, is that rural? We were having this discussion last night. My wife said, so I'm confused now. What is rural again? You know? So one of the things we have done is try to talk with faculty even about the language they use, the examples they use. So the moment you start to think you have students in your class who are from other cultural experiences, other countries, whatever, you have to change the perspective of, oh, everything's, you know, U.S. based or even Pennsylvania based or even Penn State based. Sometimes we get so small in our thinking. Asking them to think about broader engagement so that you can include somebody who might be in another country or something. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting that course up and online, dealing with some of the nuances that we'd like to have. We're still working on that.
It has to do with, you mentioned this, I think it was in freshman class with 400 students, and you're talking about how it's important to get students to learn how to learn better. And the nice thing about a 400-seat lecture hall, is that it's a very cost-effective model. and that's a product of industrialization and how to follow. So then I was saying, we sell this commodity ultimately, and higher ed institutions are also the gatekeepers of the quality of that commodity. And there's this trade-off of, we want learning to be quality based, but we also want it to be cost effective. And where there's innovation is where people are willing to sacrifice that quality. Then they're inherently more cost effective. And I almost wonder if there isn't an arms race that's going on where quality is inevitably going to suffer, because people will be able to innovate. The consumer, the student, necessarily isn't always interested in quality. They're interested in access. They're interested in the commodity. And institutions are trying to impose quality on the consumer. And generally, in market economies, that doesn't work. Generally, the consumer wins out in the end, or perceives they win, and they get the commodity for a cheaper price at sacrifice of quality. So I just thought, I'd be curious to hear what you say on that.
Is there a question in there anywhere? Are you an economics major by any chance?
One here, because it seems like more of an economic problem than we talk about it from all these ideological perspectives, but it's really, I think, economically driven process.
And you're touching on so many different issues there in your statement about quality and about the brand and about what the consumer wants. So we did a research project called The Quality of Instruction, and we looked at student perceptions and faculty perceptions of what characterizes in all three formats, two formats actually, only resident face-to-face and online. And we asked students, what are the things that indicate that you've just had a quality experience? And to your point, those indicators had very little to do with technology, very little to do with innovation. They wanted the content. Now, to tell you what they did say, though, they really value an instructor connection. This is really important to them. One of the reasons they're coming to this event is because I've got this expert in electrical engineering in this area. So now how do we take that and scale that, right? Even to 40 students. Let's say 20 is the acceptable, 20 to 25 in online learning is sort of acceptable norm. How do you take that and make that 100 or 500 or 1,000? And where are those trade-offs, right? Because you're exactly right. At some point, that there's going to be a trade-off. I think you can do it so long as you are willing to maybe reconceptualize your definition of quality. So if quality for you, and I'm sorry, is it Deborah? Denise. If quality for you is that Denise personally interacts with every student, and that interaction is, let's even say, once a week, that's going to be a tough one to scale, right? But if quality means that Denise interacts with a group of 5 students, then you can start to see, well, we can scale that a little bit, and perhaps we had a TA with Denise's class, and so all of a sudden you get to 100. So there are ways and strategies to get through it. But you're right, economics is the bottom line driver. It's why we have 400. It's not because it's good pedagogy, right? We would all admit that. But having gone through this MOOC experience, I think we've learned, at least at Penn State, we've learned a lot about some of those trade-offs. There are ways of taking a Denise and through the use of technology and capturing some of her expertise to make it feel like, for Carol, it's more of a one-to-one relationship. And then if there are interactions that are going to occur, perhaps those interactions are happening with a TA, and we have to be creative about that. I think it's possible, but it's the hard reality of balancing the economics out with the quality.
Because you just touched on a lot of things that there is research that discusses the difficulty of students who start at community colleges moving into a 4-year program. There is research that discusses that, especially in engineering, that it's difficult for people to make the choice of doing an engineering discipline if they haven't had an engineer in their background. All of this sort of relates around this idea of social capital, which is the connection between a person, the one-to-one connection. And so in terms of research and access, We have a lot of rural communities, bush communities. That's how you can distinguish Alaska from other rural places, is because we call our communities bush communities, that have no access to engineering curriculum at the lower level. They always, and you might consider them the community colleges. In order to finish a 4-year degree, they would have to come into Fairbanks, Fairbanks or Anchorage. Fairbanks is a large city for most of these people. So you're talking about online innovation and learning as opposed to online courses. Okay, so I'm interested in taking those students in Dillingham or Bethel and connecting them with my students in a peer-to-peer instruction, which is somewhat scalable because then I don't have to talk to them.
Sure.
It increases their social capital so that they have a reason to come to Fairbanks, that they know somebody in Fairbanks, they might feel comfortable in Fairbanks, that they would connect into Fairbanks in that way by being able to do these courses in their home community in advance of that. So that's the setup, and then the question is, and that's one of the things my PhD student is working on. The question is, have you keep on talking about this world courses, World Campus. Are those strictly online classes? Do they connect with face-to-face curriculum? Do you intermix those students at the same time, online, face-to-face?
How does that work?
How does that work for you? Do you do it, and how does that work for you?
Yeah, we do it, but we have a variety of different models, and it works pretty well because the model matches the curriculum and matches the program. So, for example, we have an intercollegiate MBA, IMBA, that uses a cohort-based model. So for 2 years, you join a community, and for 2 years, you go through very intensive experience. And twice in that experience, I think it's once after the second semester and at the very end, you actually have a face-to-face where you come to Pennsylvania. I think it's typically at Pennsylvania. And the first time you go into a corporation, and there's those, I think the cohorts are 30 students, if I remember right, and they work within the corporation on a case study kind of a thing. And then they come together and they do another case study at the very end, and that cohort group really bonds. Again, it's not a scalable model, but the people in the College of Business said it's really important for us to have this kind of an experience. When you say you have a Penn State MBA, it has to mean a certain thing. We have other students, other courses who have mostly asynchronous. As a matter of fact, I would say 85% of our courses are completely asynchronous. That is, there's never a requirement to be on time, for Skype or for Google Plus or whatever. Increasingly, and the primary reason for that is that these students are literally distributed around the world. Now, I'd like to say we are really the world campus. We're really not. I mean, we're really the Northeast corridor campus from say, Baltimore, D.C., up through the New England state. I mean, that's our largest population draws in that community. But you still have people, working different shifts and schedules and all. Increasingly, faculty are finding ways to embed synchronous. So they may have a mid-checkpoint conversation where they're going to, and now what they'll do is they'll take that week and they'll arrange 3 different, so they'll have one in the morning, from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., they'll have one at noon, and they'll have one from 5. And that might be an hour long. Sometimes they're optional, so that you're not penalized if you can't be there, that kind of a thing. So each course and each program has to make some of those decisions. Increasingly in fields like yours, engineering, students are required to create a relationship within their company or to do some of the lab exercises and to do some of the assignments that are more data-driven or more hands-physical. There are ways to do it, and it's actually I forget, there are quite a few instructional designers in the room. I think for instructional designers, it's the fun, at least it was when I was an instructional designer, of figuring out what does the faculty member want, And then how, that's the creative art part of instructional design. And sometimes I think that's what can bring a unique perspective to a faculty member. Faculty members are so driven and dedicated to a content domain, they're not always thinking about creative, different pedagogies. And that's where I think the learning designers, I used to love to sit down with, I worked on one of my early projects was in turf grass management, identifying weeds for turf grass management. And I was so fat, and I'd leave that meeting and I'd go to speak to my Spanish faculty member because she was working on an evolution of the Spanish language project. And then I'd leave that and go work with this cardiac surgeon at the Hershey Medical Center because he was working, as a designer, it was this challenge of each one of these things being a little bit different. So I think it's, there's no one given answer, I think, that works for everybody. It's a creative mix of each, mainly understanding who your target audience is. So if your target audience is in the same time zone and has access to a certain level of technology, synchronous, it would seem to me, could be a really good component. It may not be the only way you do it, but it could be a good component of a program. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how World Campus kind of became World Campus and you go from a culture of maybe not so much distance delivery to having 16,000 students, and then how taking World Campus and being able to fund projects like COIL is actually sustainable at Penn State?
Yes, my boss reminds me of that all the time. My boss says, he's vice president for outreach. He says, Larry, if the World Campus is not successful, COIL doesn't exist. And I think, okay, I better make sure World Campus is successful, right? So we were doing distance education, I think, before you guys. We started in 1892. Do you know when you started?
Depends on how you define distance.
Well,
Online kind of.
Yeah, correspondence we've been doing for probably 45 to 50 years.
So we have a few years on it. Our College of Agriculture started mailing out a correspondence study called Home Study in the late 1800s on how to milk your goat, how to crochet, whatever. But that was the start of it. So when in 1995, 96, our then president, some of you may know his name is Graham Spanier. He's also been tied up in our big controversy. Graham Spanier, then president, came back to the distance education unit, which was doing correspondence study, and said, hey, there's this stuff that people are talking about delivering courses online. What's Penn State's response going to be? Then he did something I think that was really, he's a brilliant man, I have to tell you, and I thought quite a leader. I don't know anything about the controversies, but I do know from his leadership. He put together a study group of all of the significant leaders in the institution, and he bought them dinner for a year every Monday night, because it's the only time these people would get together. So from 5 to 7 every Monday night for a year, they got together, and so it was the IT director, it was the libraries director, it was student services, it was all of these, because what he didn't want to have happen was a unit get developed and somebody can then take pot shots at, right? Like the IT people then would say, oh, well, you're not using the right technology. He wanted them at the table. And I have to tell you that not everybody at the table was a big supporter of the project. Some of them, I think, for political reasons, probably didn't want it to succeed because maybe their unit didn't get, who knows, politics, But that started, he actually put the name of the World Campus on it as a holding thing. Let's just call it, I don't know, the World Campus for right now, and then we can fix it later. Well, when it came time to fix it later, he had become so enamored with his name that since he named it, he didn't want, so we got stuck with it. We said even then, we're really not the World Campus. We've got less than 2% of our enrollments are outside the U.S., and most of those are military. So to say we're the World Campus is a stretch. But anyways, then, so this unit was already constructed, called Distance Education, was already organized. They knew how to take student payment at a distance. They knew how to serve the adult learner. So they were already structured for this. And then over a period of time, we began to transition correspondence study down as we built the online learning program up. So, today, and we went from 4 courses the first January of '98, with 42 total enrollments to today, I think enrollment-wise, we're over 60,000 enrollments. And now, head count, I forget how many students initially were in, like 12 or 13. Now, as I said, we're about 16,000. One of the things I think that they've done fairly well from a leadership perspective, and we talked a little bit about this in IELOL, the Leadership Institute, was Penn State, Graham Spanier said from the very beginning, we are not going to create a separate, like, satellite entity. We're going to make this a part of the way the university thinks about it. So the World Campus actually has no faculty members. We have no curriculum. We give no degrees. That's all the purview of the academic units. And that's worked very, very well. So we were tempted many times to say, look, if we can just cut those dang academics out of it, we can hire adjuncts and put our own programs together, and we can do it faster, which we probably could have. But then you would be creating a subsystem. And we said, no, we're going to go with the academic unit. So that's the model that's been built. So we walked around onto academic deans and department chairs and knocked on the doors in the mid-90s and said, hey, do you want to deliver your courses online? And what do you think most of them said? Online? You can't learn online, you know? Or, that's not for us. We don't do that, you know? We're special. We're unique. Whatever. You heard, we heard all the stories. At about 2004, 2005, when the revenue started coming in and we started seeing in the black, all of a sudden the other academic units who didn't initially respond so well became pretty enamored and said, how do we get into that? We now have the reverse problem of having to say no to more programs than we say yes to. Some of those program ideas from academic departments and faculty members, so no offense, is that they wouldn't be sustained in the marketplace. I had an example. It's a silly example, but I swear to goodness it's true. Faculty member in the College of Ag. Do you know what a cow stanchion is? You know what stanchions are? There's little huts that they put. He wanted to put an online program on how to build those efficiently. And this was his domain. So I mean, he was really passionate about this. We just said, you know, Bob, there's probably not enough people out there in the world who are going to buy a course on how to build efficient cow stanchions. So sometimes you had to have whole programs, academic programs, that once they reach their peak and they've started to dip, you can see the marketplace moving away. You have to close those programs down. Very hard to do. So we now have, and I'm thinking, Casey, it would be you, we now have a group of people who do nothing but manage these programs, figure out which ones are the right ones for us to go out with, when do we close them down, you know, how do we develop projections for each one to see where it's going to hit in enrollments. That's the business side. We're talking about the business side. There's a whole group of people who do nothing but figure that stuff out. And then we built around that, we built a learning design group, student services group, marketing group, and so forth. And that's the organizational structure we have today. It's a very, very large organization. I'm telling you, it generates a lot of revenue that goes back into the academic units. And the beauty of the revenue it generates is it doesn't go through Old Main. So now you have the attentions of the deans and the department chairs, and they get that makes them very interested. Anything else from this? Any ideas get stimulated or thoughts about things you could do or not do? Or
could you tell us a little bit about how you're doing research in what works and feeding it back in? How are you disseminating the results of that research?
Well, as I said, Laura, we're a little bit early. We haven't quite seen the fruition of it yet, but we did something last fall, which would have only been at about our 1-year birthday. Last September, October, we called it the Coil Research Symposium. So everybody who had received a RIG grant was required to present a 3-minute commercial on their project, because we had at that time 20-something, so you couldn't have them go real long. So they had to make really fast presentations. And we got everyone in the room together, and it was amazing. I mean, it was the most exciting when you're sitting there listening to faculty, even in 3 minutes, say, well, here's my project on 3D printers, and I've got students making these parts that go into this thing, and then we're going to research this and see whether it has the tensile strength to make it, it's like, wow, really? That's really cool. Out of that grew connections, people in other departments saying, oh, you're working on that? I've got a similar kind of thing, which is what we see. I get teased for overusing the word hub, but I see COIL as a hub within the institution. We connect all of the spokes, or we should be connecting the spokes between different kind of organizations to help make things happen. What we need to be seeing, and we're not seeing it yet, is we need to be seeing money come in from external, because my boss is going to start to say, okay, Larry, we're seeding you with $500,000. Where are the research grants now coming from NSF and NIH and Gates and all that kind of stuff? So that's one thing we have to do a better job of getting out there. The other thing is we need to see more publications in research journals. That'll start to be the evidence, I think, the trail of evidence that we'll leave once the programs get far enough that we can write scholarly publications on. But we understand that's probably a 3 to 5 year process till those things really kind of grow up. Other kind of questions, or would something like this work here? I mean, forget the $500,000 because I don't have it to leave with you today. But
we actually have something called Site Fellows.
Oh, do you?
In its pilot year that sounds very much like this.
Okay.
And so actually Susan disappeared, but she's one of the Site Fellows.
Oh, okay.
And they've generated some really interesting projects out of this. It's a small, there's only 8 faculty members who are part of the program, but they're doing some really cool stuff. Rorik Peterson's doing cold climate plugins for our cars in the winter.
Oh,
So he's working with a cohort of students to develop energy efficient plugins for people's cars.
Okay.
That could theoretically be put to use right here on campus. And
Wow.
so there's a whole range of projects that are coming out of this thing. And I believe that one of our faculty members is working on a paper that's going to be published. Actually, 2 faculty members, I believe, are going to they're going to be publishing some work that they've done over the last year.
do you have a plan for then celebrating when that happens?
I think that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Aside from, a nice wine. Yeah, I would think anything you can do. For example, one of the things we will be doing is as our projects come to fruition, we'll then be encouraging and working with those faculty to get submissions for conference presentations. Maybe we can put some money toward funding them to get someplace to present.
One of our site fellows is going to be at HETL.
Oh, really?
Dunlap is going to be presenting on some of the things that she's been doing with the iPad in the classroom and augmented reality.
Dunlap, like the tire.
Yep.
Okay, I'll watch for that one.
Oh, and yeah, Rob Prince is also